My name is Paul, and I'm a hardware engineer. Hashtag what is JavaScript? And I'm going to talk a little bit about the company that I work for and how we try to make an impact through the work we do. Cool, so what we do at Lumkani is we try to use technology broadly, that's hardware and software, in order to create resilience in the most underserved communities in our country. And in doing that, we try to create financial inclusion. So basically, what we started off doing is using IoT to address the challenge of shack fires in South Africa. That was the starting point. This is, I brought some props along, so this is one of the detectors we've developed. And how it all started was on the 1st of January 2013, the day after New Year's, we all woke up to the news that 6,000 people had lost absolutely everything they have in a fire in Khayelitsha. And I think as South Africans, this isn't something that I have to really explain too deeply. It's something that we feel and we experience and we hear on the news all the time. And you know, the challenge is obvious. We have extremely densely populated communities that have very dangerous living environments, and if a fire spreads, it leaves everyone with absolutely nothing and kind of entrenched in these cycles of poverty. And we were really kind of galvanized by that experience, and as a team of engineers and friends, we decided that there's most certainly a technology solution that could at least help to improve this. And I'd like to just describe a little bit about how that came about and a bit about the technology as well. So what we've got here is actually an in-home heat detector. This is a radarized detector, and we've seen a lot of research that shows that just early warning in itself can improve the chances of stopping devastation drastically. 80 to 90% probably in some cases. And what we've designed this to do is be especially relevant to an informal settlement, to a shack, which has lots of other disturbances. Smoke detectors, for example, wouldn't work very well because they would be false alarming all the time because of the environments. The next level that we built in is we really wanted these sensors, and I'll talk about why we decided to do that a bit later, but we really wanted these sensors to be able to communicate with one another. We actually decided that what was really important is to spread a community-wide alarm so that people can respond in an organized and communal way. And in order to do this, we had to develop a mesh network that was robust within a tin shack, which some of you might know is a pretty good example of a Faraday cage, which makes it really difficult to send RF signals through. So we took that on. And then we realized that we actually are really, really interested to know exactly when these sensors are triggering and why they're triggering. So we decided we'd build a data collection device, a gateway that could listen to all these signals and feed that information back to us, that we could analyze what was causing them to trigger. And actually, in reality, we were terrified that we just deploy a system that would be false alarming all the time. So we wanted to also have a kill switch that we could just go like, shut it all down, man. It's not working. And luckily, we haven't had to do that, but we built that in, and that was enabled through a GSM gateway. This is an example of that gateway. It's a really small device. I should have brought one, but it didn't fit in my jacket pocket. And it's solar powered, extremely low power. We can literally just deploy this onto a roof of a home, and it is able to collect information from up to 10,000 detectors at a time. Sorry, I'm geeking out a little bit here on the gateway because it's got a lot of stuff in it, but we actually don't use traditional ways of sending data through GPRS. We've used the technology called ThingStream to build an MQTT connection over USSD. This means that our messages are much cheaper, they're actually lower power, and we can get signal in places where you basically see emergency calls only. We can get information out of those areas. It also means that it's multi-operator, so we can cross to Vodacom, MTN, all the different networks, depending on which has the best connection, and it's globally roaming, so we can deploy these devices in any country, and we can have connectivity, which was an absolute nightmare when we were still using SIM cards, because, wow, yeah, don't try that, it sucks. We also have an LP-WAN backup, so we have Sigfox as well. If there aren't any GSM networks available, we can send messages through Sigfox as well. So the last little piece of the puzzle is that when we actually detect a fire, we're able to send SMSs to any of the users in that community to warn them about the problem. And we are also able to get responses from those community members to essentially help us to classify the fires. Was this a false alarm or was this an actual event? And if we can confirm that there was a fire from feedback, we can deploy emergency services, or we can offer assistance and send out sort of higher warning. We have confirmed that there's a fire. Be sure to protect your possessions. So this is a quick summary on the system. We have an in-home heat detector. We have a way of sending that message to all the neighbors. We can collect data through the gateways, and we can send SMSs to warn people even if they aren't in their homes. But we realized quite early that we actually wanted to offer a little bit more. This is just the technology solution, but it didn't feel at the time as a holistic enough way of solving this challenge. And what we developed in the meantime is an agent app that allowed us to collect end users' information. So in this case, we're using it to collect GPS coordinates, to geolocate every single device, and to collect cell phone numbers so that we could SMS people in the event of a fire. We then also built a platform that allowed us to visualize this IoT network. This is actually a photo from Kosovo and Kailicha. There's about 6,000 sensors installed in one part of the community. Then you can just see the density of each one of those little blue tags represents a single heat detector. In so doing, in building these tools, we'd realized that we'd address some of the critical challenges in creating financial inclusion for these end users, right? We were now able to collect personal information. We were able to geolocate every single device, which essentially gave us an address to communities that traditionally were completely uninsurable because they weren't actually addressed. We couldn't prove that you lived in this particular home. And it led us to launch, to my knowledge, the first of its kind household protection insurance against fires for people that don't have addresses. What that lets you do is for 60 Rand a month, you can rent a device. We cover you up to 40,000 Rands in damages if your house does experience a fire. An agent will come and install a device for you. There's sales agents in all the communities that we operate in. You will receive SMSs, and Lumkani will maintain that system for you. So that is the fastest I could summarize everything that we do. And I'd love to, if there's any questions about the model, about how we distribute things, I'd love to talk to anyone afterwards, or I take some questions. But OfferZen kept saying to me, talk about the challenges. The solution's fine, but like, how did you get there? What are the things you had to overcome? And I think that's actually probably more interesting, and is to try and share some of the experiences we had and to make it relevant to everyone sitting here as well. So the first thing is this idea of product market fit, and having to really consult at every single step of the way with our end users about what solution they would need to have to alleviate the problem, right? I think the first thing in our team that we had to acknowledge is that we know nothing. We know absolutely nothing. That's the premise. And we have to embed into our company this ability to listen and empathize with end users. Otherwise, we will build things that will be thrown away after a few months. This photo here is a photo that I really love. This is Lumka Kawuta. She is the community leader in UT Gardens in Kailicha. That was the first community that we hosted a co-design workshop with. So we spent a lot of time in communities in Kailicha trying to understand what a solution to this challenge would look like. Lumka is actually holding the first ever Lumkani device. You can see that that's exactly what a product that an electrical engineer would design. It's a black box. They're like, how do we put it up? It's like, double-sided tape? I don't know. So we got a huge amount of feedback there, right? The first thing was like, wow, this looks like trash. You got to make something that looks a lot better. And we're like, is that really important to people? Turns out it is. And the other piece of feedback that we got was that you're misunderstanding the challenge. I don't really mind. I need to know about fires, not only that happen in my house, but I need to know about fires that happen in my neighbor's house, because that is just as much of a risk as a fire in my own home. And that was really the point at which we had to redesign the whole system to incorporate this network. allowing us to send community-wide alerts. And through the insights, obviously, of the community leadership, we were able to develop a system that is able to actually radically reduce the spread of fires, not through our own insights, but through listening to others. The other thing is, and I'm sure this is it's a bit of a trope now in software development, but iteration after iteration upon iteration, right? And I can't sort of emphasize this enough. This is a timeline of detectors that we had to roll out. And I think what was really important, and I'm glad we made this decision, is that we would never get it right first time. This is inordinately more complex when you're dealing with hardware, right? I can't just git push to all of my sensors, unfortunately, which is a problem. So you have to design strategies that allow you to deploy solutions, get feedback, improve on them, and then redeploy other solutions. So the cycles that you iterate in, you have to try and optimize to make sure that those are as short as possible, but never think that you can get it right first time, basically. There always has to be improvements and space for that. And if you feel like your technology is perfect, you're not looking close enough. Something that we were super conscious of is the cost sensitivity of this product. The market that we were trying to serve and the problems we were trying to address meant that we had to be able to optimize for cost at every single level. And I think that this doesn't necessarily come naturally for engineers, especially for hardware engineers. If you're faced with a problem, I need a sense for fires and send a message, what do? You go online, you search what is the best processor out there right now, and you try and design an application that utilizes all of the newest technology and best features out there, right? We did exactly the opposite. We went onto DigiKey, which is the largest sort of hardware sourcing platform, and we just filtered microcontroller by price. And we said, okay, we're gonna design this sensor with that microchip. It happens to be very close to this one here, PIC16 F18326. I think we've gone 2 steps up because we realized we just really can't fit it in. And that difference in price is about $12 cents from the original to the one that we're currently on. But imbuing in our organization the sense that frugality and cost saving is actually really important, I think has led to a huge amount of innovation. Basically being able to say, we want to be able to solve this problem with the constraints that we have, in this case, cost or any other number of constraints. Another example of this is that's a transceiver there. That's very similar to the transceiver that we use to communicate, to create that mesh network. The problem with doing RF communications is you need a really stable center frequency, basically, so that 2 devices are speaking on the same they speak in the same language, right? They both know what the center is for them to communicate over. Now, that's okay. There's solutions to that problem. One of the problems that you have is that you have drift over time, so they can go out of sync. You also have temperature variations. So if they're experiencing a different temperature, then they can be out of sync and they can't hear one another. The traditional way of solving this problem is to use a temperature compensated oscillator, which gives you a lot of benefit, and it costs about $40 cents more than a plain crystal, which is the cheapest solution. And we decided that was too much to spend. So we developed a network, a modulation scheme that allowed us to deal with a wide range of deviation. It meant that we didn't have to calibrate our devices as much, which meant that they were lower cost to manufacture, and it meant that we could use much cheaper forms of hardware to achieve the same results. Another thing that we had to optimize for was the manufacturing process. And everyone thinks that per second billing was invented by the mobile networks. Well, in a factory floor, when you're manufacturing technology, you're actually being charged per second, right? Which is kind of crazy. So we realized from early on that our price is a huge percentage of your cost is actually in manufacturing these devices, and we really wanted to optimize the manufacturing process through the use of technology. So I have one more little prop. This here is a Raspberry Pi with a little bit of extra stuff that we've put on top, and this device here has manufactured 30,000 sensors, right? And all of the automated testing that is done on the factory floor, so our ability to QC every single device is just controlled through this one Raspberry Pi here. And the solutions that were out there when we consulted with the manufacturers, they're like, oh, that's like 100,000 Rand that you're going to need to spend on an automated test jig. We built it out of one Raspberry Pi and a few pieces of Masonite, so we're pretty stoked about that. They said, please don't drop this one on stage, because they knew that I was going to throw it around to try and show my point, like, it's fine, it doesn't even, and they're like, don't throw it on the ground, please. Another thing that really helped us, this is the logo of a company called Ballina IO. If any of you are into the sort of single board computer space or interested in Raspberry Pis in general, Ballina lets you deploy images, Linux images, to remote devices at the click of a button. It's extremely powerful. It means that we can update our code remotely on the factory floor, which is really, really powerful when you're trying to iterate through new designs. You can make sure that your whole fleet of manufacturers or devices is constantly running master. So the other thing that I learned along this journey, and this was from my colleagues in the software team in Lumkani, who have attended conferences and watched a lot of talks and kind of know a little bit about web development and best practice, is that hardware engineers and firmware development is sadly very much, in my opinion, stuck in the 90s, right? You have people that are like, what, you don't use assembler? Come on, and there's this pushback like, oh no, we have the hard life, we're kind of gonna stick in our ways, and that's great because we'll come up with solutions, but haven't really put a lot of time into considering how they can incorporate some of the best practices from web development into hardware development. So we spent a lot of time trying to optimize the way that we write code. In this case, it's C, developing really considered interfaces between all of them. And this kind of sounds, I'm sure, quite boring for a software audience, but for hardware developers, they're like, what, objects in C? Are you serious? That's insane. So we had to spend a lot of time trying to build that out so that we could create maintainable and testable code, right? Which often, if you look under the hood, is not the case. We, again, had to put a lot of work into developing good unit tests for all of our hardware, because in my experience, that isn't really normal practice when it comes to firmware, and I don't know how that's possible. And then again, continuous integration through Ballina, being able to deploy any changes to our manufacturers so that they can program them directly onto the devices as they come off the line. So just to give a little bit about our impact, so far we've installed 35,000 roughly sensors across South Africa, a couple in Bangladesh. We're about to roll out some into Kenya and into Congo. We've paid out more than R1 million in claims to our clients. And in the last month, we have stopped 8 fires across South Africa that we've limited the spread to the first home. Across the life of the company, it's in the hundreds. I don't know the exact number, but yeah. And in closing, I just can't emphasize enough, and I'd like to echo what you said, is that the potential to create impacts just from the people that are sitting here that know a little bit or quite a lot about software is immense. And I think it would be really important for people to apply those skills into ways that we can uplift and create impact in the most at-risk and underserved communities in this country. Thank you very much.
I think what you said is so powerful, that we all have the opportunity to have so much impact. And I think one of the reasons that a lot of us don't and want to is because we don't really know how we can help. So for instance, you spoke about going into the community and realizing that you didn't really understand the problems at all. So it's about like kind of empathy and understanding the problems. What do you think some of the ways are that we can or raise awareness, or I don't know, create channels where people can more easily access the problems so that they can start thinking creatively to help it? Because you guys, it sounds like you've done that really well.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I think that's a great question. The honest truth is that we kind of have this misconception, I think, that there's like a hierarchy of problems and that we have to constantly be like hitting the most important, what's the most pressing need, right? I would never have dreamed that I would be in this position trying to solve this problem. It just kind of happened naturally. And I think there's a lot to be said about that we should just try and make impact in the ways that resonates with us, right? It doesn't have to be, it's not like we all have to go and try and address world hunger. Like, if it's about trying to reduce the amount of meat that people eat, or a carpooling service that we can reduce carbon emissions, I mean, those are all really important problems. And I think the answer is to try and understand either what resonates with you on any level, and the other thing is just to be open and listening, and to find the problems is most certainly not the challenge in South Africa, I think, unfortunately, that this is a place that has many challenges, and any number of them, or any one of them, would be a great service if we were able to even make a small difference there, I think.
Are you guys bootstrapped? Are you a for-profit company or sort of social entrepreneur?
Yeah, great question. So we'd call ourselves a social enterprise. So we're trying to optimize not only for bottom line, but for impact, for doing good in the world. We're actually VC funded. We bootstrapped in the beginning through getting grants and through distributing sensors in the beginning through CSI budgets, NGO partnerships, but the business has moved quite a lot towards actually emphasizing the partnerships in the insurance space and trying to offer those as a sustainable business solution, not only for our customers, but for ourselves. I think that was very important. Actually, the spark there was that we felt that it would be remiss to expect end users to wait for subsidies, basically. So we wanted to create a solution that allowed for anyone to buy the protection and act actively, right? And I think that the problem with government funding, in some cases, or depending on NGOs, is that people are just waiting, basically, for you to secure that funding, and that didn't feel quite right for us. Cool. Any more questions? Otherwise, I'd love to talk. Oh, there we go.
Hi.
Hi.
I just wanted to ask, it sounds like your first business idea was to just create the devices that detected the shack fires, and it sounds like to sell them to the communities and use them, and then you transitioned into kind of the insurance space. So what stopped your company from just selling the devices to an existing insurer and kind of carrying on with the new project, as opposed to now getting into funding for people in those communities?
Sure. I think that's a great question. Like, why not just focus purely on the hardware and leave it up to someone else to distribute them? I think the simple answer is that no one was prepared to do that. So we showed the evidence that we had of how we were able to reduce risk to our underwriter Hollard, and they were like, wow, that's amazing. This is something this actually means that we have information that we can use to create a risk price. Cool, do you guys want to distribute it as well? And we're like, okay. So, I mean, I want to build hardware, right? So there's a reluctance in me to have to manage an entire network of agents, but I actually really have grown to love that aspect of it, right? And to come up with a holistic solution to a challenge. There are pieces that we'd like to unbolt at some stage of the business, but at this stage, there's not enough of an ecosystem that we can leverage off of to deliver the service that we want to. The other thing, I think, and maybe it touches there a little bit, is that I think this is a general trend in IoT. Like, so the first problem of like, can we just sell sensors directly to people? The answer is not really. It's very, very difficult. And I think that this is not just a trend in the lower income space, but across the board. Like, no one really wants to pay for something and then have to pay to connect it to do its function on a monthly basis, right? And this is a challenge that most IoT companies have, is that how do I get people to pay monthly for the cost that I'm incurring to have this connected to the internet, right? And I think the trend we're seeing is that you have to try and find mutually beneficial services that in this case, the IoT device reduces the risk substantially so that the insurance can exist, and the insurance brings a recurring value to that IoT device. So there's this nice, like, symbiotic relationship. Not enough time. Okay, well, see you later. Thanks, guys.